Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kenzie Chin. I am the coordinator of educator preparation here at DESE. Welcome to our info session on the updates to the professional standards for teachers and the candidate assessment of performance. My name is Kenzie Chin, and I'm joined here by my colleagues, some of them who are off camera, but Evelyn Pina, Sohee Kwan, and Lindsay Zorich. Lindsay and I will be presenting today about the CAP, but also particularly about the PSTs. The objective of this session is to learn about the updates to the professional standards for teachers and the candidate assessment of performance in order to support implementation, full implementation during the 25-26 academic year. Here are the topics that we're going to cover today. We'll talk about what are the PSTs in CAP, an overview of the updates to the PSTs, PST spotlights on a couple of PSTs of interest, an overview of updates to the essential elements, and a quick overview of the additional implementation supports that might be applicable to faculty and department heads, and then we'll go into Q&A. So as always, we'll start today's session with our team's beliefs about educator preparation and the students across Massachusetts. We believe all students can thrive. We believe all students deserve access to effective educators. We believe through strong preparation, all educators can be effective on day one. We believe all educators must support each and every student in their care. We believe students are best supported when families, communities, and educators work together. We believe DESE, sponsoring organizations, and PK-12 schools and districts will need to take action to disrupt inequities. And we believe DESE, sponsoring organizations, and PK-12 schools and districts will need to partner to build an education system that lives up to these beliefs. These beliefs have informed all of the revisions that we'll be updating you on today. And we are excited for you to dig into some of the changes. So I'll hand it off to Lindsay.
Thanks, Kenzie. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Zorich. I'm the Assistant Director of Educator Preparation here at DESE. Today's presentation is going to be an overview of the changes that we've made to the PSTs and CAP over the last year. We have some new folks in our community, so we want to start by providing an overview of what the PSTs and CAP are and how they align to other work here at DESE. There are two sets of expectations in what Massachusetts believes makes an effective teacher. Those are content knowledge and pedagogical skills. Obviously, there's a big overlap there. Content knowledge for teacher licensure is established through the subject matter knowledge guidelines and assessed throughout coursework. Pedagogical skill expectations are established through the professional standards for teachers, or the PSTs, and are initially assessed through coursework and then through the candidate assessment of performance, or CAP, as the performance assessment during a candidate's practicum, determining their ultimate readiness to be endorsed for licensure. So one of my amazing mates will drop the link to the PST guidelines in the chat. But this is a quick orientation to how that document is structured. So when you open the PSTs and you scroll down to the actual PSTs and their practice level, you'll see the standards, indicators, and elements. So the 4 standards are up at the top of the page and are labeled with Roman numerals. These articulate the broad categories of practice necessary for educators to disrupt patterns of inequity and well serve Massachusetts' richly diverse student bodies. The next level are the indicators, which are labeled with a capital letter. These outline the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that make up effective practice within each standard. And the most detailed level are the elements, which are labeled with Arabic numerals. Each indicator includes 1 to 4 elements, which define the specific knowledge, skills, and behaviors that make up effective practice within the indicator. On the right side, you'll see the differentiated practice level indicated for each element with an X and a thickly bolded gray box. Massachusetts Candidate Assessment of Performance, or CAP, is designed to provide a mechanism for teacher candidates to receive high-quality feedback from their supervising practitioner and program supervisor. It's also designed so that by the end of the CAP process, the supervising practitioner and program supervisor are able to assess the overall readiness of a teacher candidate. The structure of CAP also creates an intentional bridge from preparation to practice by aligning the preparation expectations with a Massachusetts Educator Evaluation Framework for in-service educators. This allows sponsoring organizations to ensure that teacher candidates have the most relevant skills and knowledge necessary to be effective teachers in Massachusetts. Changes to the PSTs and CAP fit in very well with our mission to improve alignment within our guidance at DESE around effective practice. The PSTs are directly informed by the standards of effective practice, and those standards inform the entire range of a teacher's career, from preparation to their beginning years in the classroom where they're receiving induction and mentoring, and through their continuous improvement as they continue later in their career. Each of these is very closely aligned with our DESE educational vision. As I'm sure many of you have heard, the model rubrics for educator evaluation have been updated over the last several years. Those changes were informed by input from hundreds of educators, students, family members, district leaders, unions, internal and external advisory groups, which made it very clear that these rubrics needed revision to center equity throughout them. After the model rubric for classroom teachers was updated, it was necessary to align the PSTs with those expectations. Then, because the CAP essential elements are a subset of the PSTs, updates to CAP were needed as well. We needed to update CAP because of the updates to the PSTs, and we also saw it as an opportunity to address some of the concerns or feedback that had been elevated over the last several years of using CAP. In addition, the guidelines for educator preparation program approval were released in 2023, which included new criteria that really required alignment between the expectations for program approval and those in the PSTs for evidence-based and culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. These changes also promoted alignment with DESE's educational vision, which was released around the same time as the program approval guidelines. As we went through the updates to the PSTs and CAP, our office had some specific goals in mind. First, of course, to align the PSTs and CAP with the updated standards of effective practice. Also to identify differentiated levels of practice that aligned with input from the field, both folks from educator preparation programs and those from pre-K-12 schools and districts, as well as research on the development of culturally and linguistically sustaining practices in novice educators. We hoped to ensure that CAP is meaningful across a variety of settings and balance the CAP requirements against flexibilities that allow for meaningful implementation. Lastly, we want to ensure that we're supporting sponsoring organizations to prepare candidates that are ready to well serve all students, especially those from systemically marginalized groups and communities when they're novice educators. So now we'll get into some of the specific updates to the PSTs. There are a few overarching revisions that were made to the PSTs. First, that evidence-based culturally and linguistically sustaining practices supporting deeper learning for all students are integrated throughout every element. The practice levels are now differentiated by element rather than indicator, and there are updated definitions for those levels of practice to help clarify the connection across practice levels, as well as the distinct expectations for each practice level. On the next few slides, I'll go through those updated definitions. Again, there are 3 practice levels for the PSTs: introduce, practice, and demonstrate. Each element is assigned a specific level of practice, which establishes the expectation, the minimum expectation that a candidate, to which a candidate is prepared in their preparation program. The expectation for introduce elements is that candidates exhibit a foundational understanding of key concepts and skills through coursework and/or in early field-based experiences. Some examples of how candidates can be introduced to an element include readings, observations, assignments, or assessments that are exposing them to both the theoretical and the practical aspects of that element. The expectation for practice is that candidates are introduced to and then actively engage in opportunities to apply the concept and skills that they have learned. They have opportunities to practice those skills, be observed by instructors or field supervisors, and get feedback on their practice. This can include opportunities in coursework or in field-based experience, such as simulations, rehearsals, role plays, one-on-one with a candidate or with a small group of candidates, whole group instruction and field placements when appropriate, attending planning and data meetings, and engagement with the school community. The expectation for demonstrate elements is that candidates have those opportunities at the introduce and practice level and are ultimately able to demonstrate proficiency in the concepts and skills they've acquired. They're able to apply that knowledge and skill in various situations, including in their field-based experiences. The application of the concepts and skills meets those established standards. And they're able to demonstrate those concepts and skills without the need for significant guidance or support, though they might still be developing the scope and consistency of their practice. The opportunities to demonstrate should be built on previous opportunities to practice and get feedback in one-on-one, small group or whole group instruction, in planning or data meetings, and engagements with school and district communities. Lastly, as we noted, a subset of the demonstrate elements were also identified as the essential elements. These are the practices and skills that are directly assessed through CAP. Candidates should demonstrate proficiency in the essential elements through their observations and through other evidence in CAP during their practicum experience. I'm going to pass it back to Kenzie to speak about a few more revisions to PSTs.
Thanks, Lindsay. So for those of you who are already familiar with the PSTs, it might be helpful to hear about how the actual PSTs were changed at each of the levels, so like standards, indicators, and elements, and why. So at the standards level, the standards weren't changed, and that was due to a regulatory requirement, so all of those are exactly the same. At the indicators level, there were significant changes. So in standard 2, this is going to sound really in the weeds if you are not super familiar with the PSTs already, but just bear with me just in case it's helpful for those who are thinking about those shifts. So in standard 2, 4 indicators are no longer included separately as they're now fully embedded into the others. So cultural proficiency is reflected throughout the PSTs because it's integral to all the indicators. Expectations is a core component of 1A curriculum and planning and 2A instruction. Social and emotional learning is now reflected in 2A curriculum and planning and 2B learning environment. And classroom management is represented in 2B learning environment. In standard 4, indicators are grouped together where they represent similar or complementary practices. So reflection and professional growth are now grouped together into reflective practice and professional growth. Collaboration, decision-making, and shared responsibility are now grouped together into shared responsibility, collaboration, and decision-making. At the indicators level, SEI indicators are now integrated throughout the PSTs as core components of culturally and linguistically sustaining practice. They're not pulled out as specific SEI indicators, and the expectation is that they're woven into other coursework, not just SEI courses. And then at the elements level, the new element descriptions have been written to explicitly integrate culturally and linguistically sustaining practices in alignment with the updates to the standards of effective practice. And then given the detailed descriptor for each element, practice levels are now differentiated at the element rather than the indicator level. So as the audience today, which is meant to be faculty members and department heads, you may be wondering about how the PSTs affect coursework and how they might be integrated. So faculty members should use PSTs to guide course design and decisions about depth and breadth of content, as well as drive assessments and feedback. They should use them to consider specific practice levels in building and revising courses. And they should consider how coursework covers part of the requirements for PSTs in addition to coursework, but the program in its totality should address all the PSTs. So we won't have time to go through all of the individual PSTs, but we did want to do a little bit of spotlighting on certain PSTs that might be of interest. So one that we wanted to talk about was curriculum literacy. So this element is 1A3, curriculum literacy, which is at the demonstrate level. And the element is that the candidate skillfully uses curricular materials by determining strengths and weaknesses of materials and adapting as necessary to plan evidence-based, inclusive, and culturally sustaining instruction, including identifying opportunities to create meaningful, relevant connections rooted in local context, identifying necessary supplemental resources and/or tiered supports to provide all students access to grade level instruction, and utilizing a coherent instructional approach that builds student learning towards grade level standards or individual learning goals over time through aligned lesson goals, scope, sequence, and tasks. So this is, again, an element that's at the demonstrate level. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it means for coursework and for programs. So the PST on curriculum literacy fits into a broader expectation that candidates should be able to use curricular materials, and when they're able to, select high-quality curricular materials when they're practicing teachers. So this expectation is also built into our program approval guidelines at the sponsoring organization level. So when we review organizations for approval overall, there are roughly 30 approval criteria, and this is one of them. This approval criteria is that the program's criterion is that the program study ensures that all candidates develop the curriculum literacy skills needed to be effective educators through opportunities to critically analyze the quality of, understand instructional approaches in, and skillfully use curricular materials. For organizations going through their review process, we ask that they attend to these look-fors that are on this slide. So for the purpose of PSTs, but also for overall program approval, this should be on folks' mind throughout the various levels of your organization. And then I just want to step back for a moment to define how DESE defines curriculum literacy, which is that curriculum literacy requires educators and educator preparation programs to shift from creating curriculum to effectively evaluating and implementing curriculum. Understand that the integration and connections among content expectations, aligned curricular materials, and student engagement are at the core of high-quality, equitable instruction. Discern high-quality curricular materials from low-quality curricular materials in order to advocate for high-quality curricular materials, and skillfully use materials through evidence-based, inclusive, and culturally responsive practices to ensure the enacted curriculum supports and engages students to reach their full potential. Curriculum literacy is an essential set of competencies for all teachers and administrators, regardless of materials that might currently be used in the school or classroom. And in order to make informed decisions that will support their students, teachers must be able to understand the integration and connections that are at the core of high quality materials. So we've hinted that potentially there's not, I'll talk about this in a minute, but there's not an expectation that students are or candidates are using particular curricular materials in their coursework that, like, for example, a sponsoring organization would have to purchase in order to be able to dig into those materials. There's no expectation about like an approved list of curricular materials that sponsoring organizations need to be using. It is an expectation in the field-based experiences domain in our program approval criteria that candidates have exposure to settings where high-quality instructional materials are being used so that they can observe and understand their impact. That does not mean that every single placement site needs to have high-quality instructional materials in order to be a placement site for candidates. But it does mean that the sponsoring organization is responsible for ensuring that the candidate does have that experience somehow in their practicum placement, and if not, then that they're supplementing that with through other means. So just to clarify about curriculum literacy, I feel like we've been beating a dead horse about curriculum literacy over the past year or so. But just to be super clear, curriculum literacy is understanding content expectations, knowing how to read aligned curricular materials, knowing how to discern high quality curricular materials over low quality curricular materials, knowing your students and skillfully using curricular materials to make them accessible to students, internalizing content and instructional approach, and holding high expectations for all students. It is not reading from a script, never creating your own units or lessons if it seems like in order to supplement, or if it seems like the curricular materials are in need of a certain different kind of lesson, or just following the set curriculum without making adjustments as you go, using the information that you're learning from students as they learn. So DESE has provided a wide array of resources and supports around HQIM, which is high quality instructional materials or curriculum literacy, to assist educators in identifying and selecting and implementing existing high quality instructional materials. They're all on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we're happy to follow up with more information about these resources if you're interested. So there are a few frequently asked questions about curriculum literacy expectations. The first is, who determines whether curricular materials are high quality? And ultimately, it's up to each sponsoring organization to determine their approach for distinguishing what makes something high quality. But we do have a resource for this, which is the Curate rubrics on our website, and we're happy to provide those materials, and we think that they're a great resource to use for this. Are we required to use specific curricular materials? No. In program approval, we might seek to understand how materials were selected and how they're being used in coursework, but we do not require specific materials to be used for sponsoring organizations to use specific materials in coursework. What do we do if our partners or field-based experience placements use low-quality curricular materials? So this is where coursework may be relevant. So it's a sponsoring organization's responsibility to prepare candidates with curriculum literacy competencies. This can happen through coursework and whenever possible field-based experiences. But if the candidate is in a placement where they do not have exposure to high-quality curricular materials, it may be it is their sponsoring organization's responsibility to make sure that they're getting those experiences, which may require some supplementation in coursework or through other ways that you have of accessing candidates. Okay, so the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about practice levels and the way that they might, just some examples of how they might be applied through some of these PSTs. So this first one that we're going to talk about is at the demonstrate level. It's purposeful assessment, and it is that the candidate uses a variety of formal and informal assessments for specific instructional purposes, including to understand each student's strengths and areas for growth, measure and monitor students' understanding throughout instruction and their progress toward grade level standards and/or individual learning goals, and actively inform instructional decisions. One possible application, it being at the demonstrate level, is that after multiple opportunities in coursework, candidates might be assessed on their ability to use purposeful assessments. For example, a final course assessment might include simulated formal and informal student data, prompts to ask how the assessments would inform candidates of understanding of student needs and what they would do next. So we're really expecting candidates to be able to perform at that demonstrate level in that final assessment. A similar, in the similar vein of assessment is the PST of accessible assessment, which is at the practice level. This one reads that the candidate implements assessments that are accessible to all students by providing multiple ways and opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning, creating opportunities for students to be able to draw from their cultural and linguistic knowledge and personal experiences, ensuring that assessment tasks, methods, and instruments maintain the rigor and high expectations outlined in the grade level standards and do not perpetuate racial or cultural or linguistic bias. And a possible application, because it's at the practice level, could be activities through coursework. So activity in coursework could be to analyze an existing student assessment and create ways that that same knowledge could be demonstrated in multiple ways that might draw from students' cultural and linguistic knowledge. So they might take, maybe they're in their practicum at the same time, or maybe they are provided an example of an assessment that is maybe a more traditional assessment, and they can say, okay, this is trying to get to this. What might be a different way that we could access that knowledge through a different form of assessment that would tap into students' cultural and linguistic knowledge? And the activity could include discussing ways that bias might emerge in assessments and how to mitigate against that. So again, not looking for things for performance at the demonstrate level, but just practicing during coursework. Another element that could be seen as related, which is also at the practice level, is sharing progress with students and families. And the candidate, this one reads that the candidate collaborates with students and their families in an accessible format and language to communicate specific, timely, and asset-based feedback on student progress toward grade level or proficiency standards, identify ways to build on student strengths and support further growth. So one possible application for this could be that in coursework, candidates can explore ways to share student assessment data with families, learn and practice translating information and making it accessible to families. So this could be like learning about how Google Translate could be a good tool or could not be a good tool for certain situations, learning about different translation tools, learning about how to advocate for translation, those kinds of activities. And again, this is at the practice level, so this can all be done in coursework. So those were the PST spotlights. At this point, generally, I would love to stop and ask for questions, but we are not going to do that. We're going to plow ahead because of the recorded format. So please, if you have questions, hold on to them and we will answer them at the end. So we will talk about updates to essential elements now. So this first one is subject matter knowledge. What I'm going to do is go through each of the essential elements, the old essential elements, and align them to the new essential elements. And some of them I'll just read through and some of them I'll give a little bit more detail about. Subject matter knowledge I'm not going to give a lot more detail about the new essential element for subject matter knowledge is just a little bit more detailed. It is that the candidate demonstrates sound knowledge of the subject matter by using evidence-based pedagogical practices that enable all students to develop and apply grade-level knowledge and skills in relevant and real-world contexts, supporting students to make connections between the subject matter and real-world issues with impact on their communities and their world, and understanding the difference between social and academic language and the importance of this difference in planning, differentiating, and delivering effective instruction for English learners at various levels of English language proficiency and literacy. So you can see how some of those changes between like weaving in SEI indicators and some of those changes you can see demonstrated here. The second one is adjustments to practice. The new essential element is that the candidate uses analysis and conclusions from a wide range of assessment data and feedback from colleagues, students, and families to adjust practice and implement differentiated and scaffolded supports for improved and more equitable student learning outcomes. High expectations and support is the next one, which reads, the candidate supports all students to meet or exceed high expectations for grade appropriate standards aligned learning, produce high quality work, and develop self-awareness and skills for independent learning by using evidence-based, culturally and linguistically sustaining instructional practices to provide equitable opportunities for grade level learning, providing flexible and responsive support, scaffolds, and tools to meet students' needs, communicating clear criteria for success, for example, models, rubrics, and exemplars, and reinforcing perseverance and effort with challenging content and tasks. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this one. During our public comment period, there were some requests to replace this essential element with inclusive instruction because of some of the things that I'll talk about when we get to inclusive instruction. We chose to keep both because of the research base that I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. So this essential element, high expectations and support, was advocated for really strongly by folks in the field due to research that indicates that high expectations and challenge levels, along with high support, leads to student success. This research pulls really heavily from Zaretta Hammond, but also from Timmermans, Papa George, Gershenson, and Kang, like a bunch of those really relevant researchers. And this chart from the pedagogist demonstrates the importance of challenge in concert with support. So just to simplify, we know that low challenge and low support leads to apathy. Low challenge and high support leads to underachievement. High challenge and low support leads to anxiety. And you can imagine the combination of high challenge and high support is most likely to lead to empowerment, high morale, and high achievement. And this is demonstrated again and again in research. So just to show this essential element again, I just want to highlight that both supporting students and high expectations are part of this essential element. This essential element, inclusive instruction, was really highlighted in public comment as one that folks thought should be included. In particular, it was noted that it was really important that this one called out individual student groups. So students with disabilities, English learners and former English learners, academically advanced students, and students who have been historically marginalized, and attending to their diverse needs, as well as the importance of providing students with multiple pathways to learn content and demonstrate understanding. So this was one that was added in actually after the public comment period. Safe learning environment, the main difference in this essential element is that the definition of safe physical and intellectual environment is really spelled out through an equity lens. But the general sentiment is the same. So I'll read the new one. The new essential element is that the candidate creates and maintains a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment by establishing with student input, classroom routines and systems to support student learning, modeling and reinforcing respect for and affirmation of differences related to background, identity, language, strengths, and challenges, supporting student accountability on the impact of their actions, enabling students to take academic risks and share ideas freely, and seeking feedback from students on their experience of the classroom learning environment and making aligned adjustments to practice. This next one is collaboration on student learning and well-being. It reads that the candidate partners with families to support students' learning and well-being by leveraging families' cultural and linguistic knowledge and expertise as assets, engaging with families about what students are learning in the classroom and expectations for student success, and collaboratively identifying and seeking family input on strategies and resources for supporting student learning and growth in and out of school. So this is one that over the first period of CAP's implementation, so like the first 8 years, we had a lot of voices from both the prep field and PK-12 that standard 3, which is family and community engagement, needed to be included in the essential elements. There was not one from standard 3 in the essential elements previously. We heard this from a lot of different kinds of stakeholders, including teachers who felt like they should have acquired this knowledge in their prep program, and administrators who felt like incoming teachers should have a stronger grasp of these skills, and prep programs who wanted to have the leverage to insist that candidates are acquiring these skills and that they have opportunities to practice them in their practicum. So we did a lot of deliberation with the PST and CAP working group. And after hearing their deliberation, getting their input, and our stakeholder engagement, otherwise, collaboration on student learning and well-being rose as the element that would be the most impactful as an essential element. We completely agree that it's really important to have an essential element in family and student engagement, and we're really excited about this development. We also know that with a new requirement, there are a lot of questions and wanting of clarity. So we are going to be co-hosting a drop-in session with the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, or NAFSCE, on what it might look like to meet this expectation, as well as sort of the national trends around expectations in this area for prep. That will be on December 5th from 10 to 11. And Evelyn is going to drop that link into the chat for registration. Okay, reflective practice. The new essential element is that the candidate reflects on the effectiveness of instruction and how one's identities, biases, and practices impact student learning and well-being, and works to improve practice and eliminate learning inequities across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, and ability, and other aspects of student identities such that all students can meet or exceed grade level standards. This element changed in content from what it was previously. And that previously it was really focused on the effectiveness of lessons and how to improve them. And it now requires significant self-reflection on the biases that an individual teacher brings into the classroom, and situates that individual in a larger picture of how their practice might eliminate learning inequities. So I know that that was a lot of information. We are doing our best to support the implementation of these new PSTs and CAP as best we can. A couple opportunities that may be applicable to faculty and department heads might be the family and community engagement drop-in session. And then we also want to make you aware that there will be a library of examples for essential elements and evidence types that kind of like triangulates how evidence can be used for the essential elements. That will come out of the communities of practice that will be happening in January to April in 2025, and they should be posted online in June 2025. So we're hoping that that will be a useful resource for folks in as they develop coursework. And then the expectations, again, are that sponsoring organizations have a full implementation of the PSTs and CAP by the 25-26 school year. The 24-25 school year is being spent preparing for full implementation, which looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different people, depending on your organization's context and what you've already been doing thus far. So we're going to stop the recording. Thank you.